Good evening, everybody.
Kavod Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, sorry to make you wait. So we're starting a new chapter now. Okay. Yeah, so it says in the Torah, אין מודדין קמח ביום טוב, כדי ללוש אלא יפחות או יוסיף מעט על המידה, right? So we talked about this a little bit before, but now it talks about, I guess this is the prime place for this. Talking about measuring, right? So in other words, if you're making something with flour, let's say you're making bread, right? So you shouldn't measure, the flour precisely. Right, so what does that mean? A little bit more, a little bit less, approximation. So he says some allowed to measure on past Pesach when you're making the matzot, because why? You have to be careful there with the measure. We talked about this already before, if you remember. Right? We talked about this issue. Why is that? Because we don't want you to have less than the amount for challah, as we said, right? That's the idea there. And we said, right, the measure for challah is 3.5 pounds. But if it's not Pesach, right, just Yom Tov in general, so there we're not really so particular about this. So therefore, we say, right, don't measure precisely, the amount of flour for whatever you're making, right? Whether it's bread or whatever you're making, cake, whatever it is. Okay. Right? So he says, right, also in Passover, as we said, right, you don't want to do too little because it's going to be not the size for challah. Also, you don't want to do too much. Why? Because then it's going to be, issue of, maybe leavening because you're baking of, the challah you're making is too big. So right, that's the idea. So, and then he says, right, Rav Alfas Oser, and the Rif forbids this. I guess he's talking about Passover, right? Even for Passover, he forbids this. When you're making matzot, we'll see. This is Rambam says also. So he says like this, right? That the Rambam, that on Yom Tov you shouldn't sift the flour. So he says even if you do shinui, interesting. But he says that if you already sifted it the day before, right, and then fell like a little pebble in there, okisam or twig, right, some impurity got in there. And he wants to do second time, right, to sift it again because of the stuff that he found in there. Mutar, it's allowed, he says. Even without shinui. But if nothing fell in there, but he just wants to, right, he wants to sift it again, just for the sifting's sake. So why does he want to sift it again? So he says he wants to make it like more, right, white bread, clean. Right? He wants it to be cleaner and whiter. Whatever, right? Like a baguette style, whatever. So if that's the case, צריך שינוי קצת. So he says you gotta do a little bit shinui there if you want to sift it a second time. כגון אגב שולחן, right? For instance, he says do it on the table, right? As opposed to, sifting it into a utensil, right? A tray, whatever. Do it on the table. That's like a shinui. Okay, אבל אינו צריך שינוי גדול, but he says you don't need a big שינוי. Right? לרקד אחורי הנפח. So what would be a big shinui? So he says, you know what it is? Like doing it upside down. Can you imagine? You invert the sifter, and you sift it upside down. So you don't need to do that much. That's already quite abnormal. Whatever it is, right? That much you don't need to do. But you got to do a little shinui. That's what he says. Okay, that's the end of the tour here. Let's go to the Bet Yosef. For some reason, the Bet Yosef is not visible here. Let's see. Perhaps I deleted it by mistake. I have to bring it up again, maybe. All right, let's try. Yeah. Of course, love. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, as we said, right, that you shouldn't measure the flour. So he says regarding this perik and sadin, right? What's the source? Over there in Betzah, Kaftet Amud Aleph, Amar Rav Yirmiyah, Amar Rav Bar Abba, Amar Rav, מודדת אישה קמח לעיסתה כדי שתיטול חלב בעין יפה. ושמואל אמר אסור. So, right, we have a machloket here. The first opinion says you're allowed to measure the flour. And then comes Shmuel and says, no, forbidden. Okay. והתנא דבי שמואל מותר yeah, so but the right it says allowed ושמואל הלכה למעשה עתה להשמינן ופירש רש"י הבא right, so in other words that's the machloket here, and then it asks a question. It says that the school of Shmuel taught that it's allowed. So yeah, whatever. It's coming to tell you, right, that Shmuel allows this. Whatever. Okay. So Perish Rashi explains, Habalish ol halacha lemase morin lo asu. Ah, okay, interesting, right? So he says that Rashi. Okay, I'm sorry, I got it now. I got it. Okay, so it's saying like this, right? That first of all, Shmuel told us that it's forbidden. And then all of a sudden, right, we saw in a different source that Shmuel says it's allowed. So Gemara answers, it's coming to teach you practical halacha. So what does that mean, practical halacha? That means, like in theory, it's allowed, but practically we don't do it. You know, something like that, right? So we'll see why that is. So Rashi explains over here, right? What's going on with that? So Rashi says, "Habalish ol halacha lemaseh morin lo asu." So he says like Rashi like this. If somebody comes and asks you what's halacha, we tell them forbidden. The echazinan inish the avid lo machinan bidei. If we see somebody doing it, we don't object against him, right? So it's forbidden if you ask, but if you don't ask and you do it, we leave you alone. You get it? Okay. That's what he's saying. So the question is, why is that like that? What's the reason for that? Right? There has to be a good reason for that. אבל אין מורין כן. So it says, מכינן בידי, דהלכה דמותר, אבל אין מורין כן. So in other words, this is a classic case of halacha ve'en morin ken, right? What does that mean? That there are certain cases where the halacha is like this, you know, that it's allowed, but we don't tell people that it's allowed if they ask us. Usually, what's the reason why the rabbis make this kind of a right system? You know, where if they ask you, we say it's forbidden, but if they do it, we don't object. Usually, the reason is because there's some kind of a pitfall here that can occur. So to protect you from the potential pitfall, we tell you it's forbidden. But the truth is, it's not. That's really the truth. It's not forbidden. That's what we're saying. Okay, good. So then he goes on. אבל אין מורין כן, וכתב הראש, ולפי זה מצינו בדפרושי דרב אשה, דרב דשארה. So it says the Rosh regarding this, right? That according to this, right, we can say, right, that Rab allows, Lav elacha lemaaseh kamar. He didn't mean practically speaking. Lo plige ve'yoter nireh derav ushmuel ve'elacha lemaaseh plige. So it says it seems more plausible to say that Rab and Shmuel are arguing about practical halacha. Ve'elacha kerav beisureh. So he says the rule is, right, that when it comes to prohibitions, we pass like Rav. When there's a machloket between Rav and Shmuel, we go like Rav. V'chen pasak Bahag. That's also Bahag says like this. B'shem yeshivat Surya, right? Aval mitivta de fumbedita shadru leisura, right? So there was a machloket between two yeshivot, right? One yeshiva was saying that it's permitted. The other yeshiva was saying that it's forbidden. Okay. Good. So now he says, right, "V'tamayu mishum diachol limdod me'etmol." So he says, why do they forbid this? According to the opinion that we forbid this, right? Because you could have done it yesterday. Like what? Did it right lower the quality of the flour by measuring it yesterday? Right? I don't think so. So you could have done it yesterday. So why do it today? You're just like you're doing extra exertion for no reason. That's the reason why. The lav tzorech kedarahu denema shelo yivgom ta'ama or shelo yakdiach etavshil. V'chen pasak arif. So the Rif paskins like that, right? That what? That is forbidden. We tell people it's forbidden. right? At least that much. But the truth is, that since we paskin like Rav and not Shmuel, so it could be that it's forbidden altogether. In other words, even if, but not just we say it's forbidden, it's actually forbidden. That's what we're saying. Okay, that's the riff, right? And also the Rambam paskins like that, balaitur, וכן זהירות אנשים שלא למדוד במידה שמודדות בה בכל, אלא או פוחתות או מוסיפות, right? So he says like this, right? That the way to do it is like this, that, don't measure the way you measure on a weekday, right? In other words, if you have like a measuring cup that you use on a weekday, right? So don't use a measuring cup, just do an approximation. A little bit more, a little bit less. Yeah, it's okay. It'll be all right. You'll be okay. Eh? That's what we're saying. אלא פוחתות במספר. אבל אף אחד מתירים היינו דווקא בימיהם שהיו נותנים אחד מכ"ד חלה, וטעם זה לא שייך לעידנה. So this also there's another thing, right? Which is that he says in those days things were different. Why? Because when you took challah, you had to take 1/24th, of the size of the dough. Today we're not really particular about this. So he says, therefore, right, in those days, there was more of a side to say that it should be permitted to measure. But he says nowadays we don't really measure 1/24th, when we take challah. We don't do a measurement like that. So therefore there's no reason to measure. בטעם זה לא שייך היינו בפסח שאין נשים יותר מ10, but he says, okay, now, right, as we said, getting back to Passover, right? When it comes to Passover, when you're making your matzot, so there, right, there was this kind of opinion that, as we saw over there when we learned the laws of matzot, right, that you shouldn't make more than isaron, right, this measure, because as we said, right, that if you make the challah, the matzah bigger than that, what's going to be is, we're concerned that it's going to get leavened like that. It's too large. Right? So therefore, right, on Passover, there's more of a side to be lenient. So it says, so there on Passover, there's room to be lenient regarding this, right? So we can measure because of this issue. But when it comes to just Stam Yom Tov, right, regular Yom Tov, not so, right? We don't measure like that. Okay, good. So let's go on. והר"ן כתב בפסק, ופסק הריף כשמואל, right? So he says, right, the Rif paskin like Shmuel, דלמעשה אסור, right? That is forbidden, practically speaking. ומי הוא מסתבר לצורך הפסח שהאישה צריכה למדוד שרה. But it says, again, right, for Passover, it could be that it's allowed. No problem with that. אפילו למעשה, even practically speaking, the lo gara mitavlin lenachtom, because it's not any worse than putting spice in, right, for the baker, for the right, or for the chef. The Rav Magid katav perek daled, so it says Rav Magid the Rif Rambam is sur gamur hu. According to Rif and Rambam, right, it's a real prohibition. It's not just symbolic, right, or whatever, right, as we said, right, practical, not practical. No, it's really a prohibition. So therefore, right, if somebody does it, we even object, because it's really a prohibition. So that's the ikar. So in other words, we have here machloket, right, between the Ran and the Rav Magid, and how to interpret the opinion of the Rif and Rambam, right? According to the Ran, it's only forbidden, we say it's forbidden, but not really forbidden. But according to the Rav Magid, it's really forbidden, and we even object. Okay, Mordechai kata b'shem Avi Azri. It says Mordechai, מנהג כאשר למדוד בערב פסח לצורך ליל שני של פסח כשאופים מצות ואף אגב דהלכה כרב בה קיימלן גשמואל דהלכה למעשה כאמר ורבן פסק כרב עד כאן השנה, right? So this rabbi brings, right, a gamut of, right, opinions over here, right? Some that permit, some that forbid. And also, as we said, right, it's different on Passover. והגאות מימוניות כתבו פרק ד'. So it says this rabbi, Ata she'en mafrishin chala ki im mashu. So he says nowadays, right, the custom is that when we separate chala, we do like, a little bit, right? We don't really measure it, the amount of chala. So therefore, right, there's no reason to measure. That's what he's saying. Asur limdod b'yom tov. So therefore, it's not allowed to measure on Yom Tov. U'belel Yom Tov shetzarich la'asot shalosh matzot. But he says when it comes to, right, as we said, Passover, when you gotta make 3 matzot, shel mitzvah v'tzarich la'asot shi'ur chala, and you gotta do like, the size of chala. Lo imdod otam ela ilosh ota b'shtez pamim. So he says don't measure it, but rather what? Right, knead it twice. V'chol pam yasim yoter, and every time he puts a little bit more, mina chatzi midah, than half the measure. V'chen katvu Tosfot b'sod pek en tzadin. That's what it says in Tosfot also. De'achshav she'en mafrishin chala. So nowadays that we don't separate chala, ki im mashu, just a little bit, right? We don't do a specific measure. Ki im mashu asur limdod b'yom tov. So therefore, it's forbidden to measure on Yom Tov. Pesach nami yesh lizaher min limdod b'yom tov lemitzvot v'tzarich la'asot pachot mikishiur. So this rabbi says even on Passover, right, you should be careful, right, not to measure on Yom Tov for the matzot. So do a little bit less, he says, right? V'lo imdod b'midah she'asur limdod b'chol. Don't use like a measuring cup, which is made for like the weekday measuring, right? The weekday method. Right, which does like accurate measure there. So what he should do is, right, do a little bit less, a little bit more. That's good. You're good. Okay, good. So then he goes on. And that was what Tur said, right? That the Rif and the Rambam are stringent, as we said. Any יודע לא תם דהי עמדידת קמח בפסח כאה לא מצאתי להם שאסרו בפסח, right? So right, that's a very interesting thing here, which we already mentioned when we read the Tur. We said, right, that when the Tur said there that the Rif and the Rambam are stringent, right? What is he talking about? Is he talking about on Yom Tov regular, or is he talking about Passover matzot? Where are they stringent, right? So Bet Yosef asked this question now, right? When you're telling me that they're stringent, what are you talking about? So he says, right, we don't really find that the Rif and the Rambam forbid on Passover, to measure for the matzot. And if you're going to tell me just because they forbade on Yom Tov in general, and they didn't say, right, that Passover is allowed, so that implies that it's not allowed, right? But he says that's not really a proof. That's interesting. It's not proof. Shehem tafsu lashon haGemara, because why? Because they're just taking the language of the Gemara. על הלשון הגמרא, דהיינו בשאר ימים טובים, אבל פסח שרת גם על דבריהם יפרשו, כן? So he says it could be, right, that the Rif and the Rambam agree with the ones who allow to measure on Passover, even though they didn't say that. On the other hand, right, they didn't say that it's forbidden. So in other words, but he says, it's, that they probably would allow that too. How do we know that? וקיים מדידת קמח בשאר ימים טובים, לא אבל לכתוב ריף ואוסר וכן הרמב"ם. ומשמע שקודם לכן כתב דמותר, אבל מאחר שקודם לכן כתב דאין מודדין, כך אבל לכתוב, וכן דת הריף והרמב"ם. Right, so, וצריך לומר, בשיטות הראש כתב, כן, שהוא כתב בפסח, אפשר שדומה לנטילת חלה, בעין יפה, שמתאים משמע, לדברי הפוסקים זה אסור לשמואל, בפסח נמי אסור, שהרי אפילו ממהם שהיו נתונים אחד מכ"ד חלה, אסר שמואל, ולראש לא עדיף פסח מנטילת חלה, בעין יפה, ומהם בכיוון שהריף והרמב"ם פסקו כשמואל, דאסר ממילא משמע דאפילו בפסח אסור למדוד מדדיד הוא. So he goes right into this whole theory of this thing, right? Trying to figure out, right, what is the opinion of the Rif and the Rambam here? Is it right? That they're talking about the issue of Passover or just in general. Um, so yeah, and he brings here, according to the Rosh, right, his viewpoint regarding this. What it is by him. V'achi naktinan. Okay, so in other words, what is the conclusion here? So he says like this, right? The bottom line, the Bet Yosef, that we paskin that the Rif and the Rambam went like the Ran explained it, right? Which is that they're not really paskening like a Rav, who forbids this, like altogether. But they're paskening like Shmuel, who says, right, we tell them it's forbidden, but it's not really forbidden. So if that's the case, right, it's more lenient, right here. Okay. So it says that comes out like this, right? It says that it's forbidden, according to Rif and the Rambam, it's forbidden also regarding right Passover as well. And he says that's halacha. So in other words, he packens the halacha, the Bet Yosef, that according to Rif and Rambam, it's forbidden even on Passover to do this. Interesting. And he says that's halacha. So therefore, according to that, right, we shouldn't measure on Passover either. The truth is that I can understand why that is, because when we learn the laws of the matzot, we said over there that it's just really a custom, this whole thing, to be so precise, with the measure of the matzah. It's not really an obligation according to halacha. So there's really no reason to be so crazy about that, to lose perspective when it comes to that, right? To let it get out of hand. So therefore, right, says the Shulchan Aruch, says the Bet Yosef, that it's forbidden to do that even on Passover to measure. Okay, interesting. All right. So let's bring up the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, so if you remember, we said yesterday, right, that we're gonna review the Shulchan Aruch because it was a little bit complicated. So if you want, we can review this, what we did yesterday, and then we can go to the current one. So it says here like this in Shulchan Aruch. This is from yesterday, right? בהמה שהיא עומדת לאכילה ורוצה לחלוב אותה, right? The animal which is designated for eating, right? And he wants to milk it, to get milk, right? But not to drink the milk, right? Right? He wants to put it into a dish, right? לאכול החלב. אם נקדרה שאין בה אוכלין, אסור, right? So you have to put it in if you're putting it into an empty vessel, it's not allowed. So how do you do it, right? If there's food in there, you can do it. If there's food in the vessel, so you can squeeze out the milk on top of the food. So why would you want to do that, right? So he says, "Kegon sheba halav letakno," because it's coming for flavor, right? You're flavoring the food by putting milk in there, or sheyesh ba perurin, the halav nivla b'hem, or alternatively, right? Similarly, that you have crumbs, right, in that utensil and in the container, and the milk will get absorbed into the crumbs. So that's the same thing, basically, right? It's gonna become food. So, right, then it says Shulchan Aruch, but he says, right, don't get out of hand with this, right? We do allow to a certain extent, but right, if you're putting lots of milk, and a little piece of bread, right? So then that piece of bread doesn't have the power, right, to absorb all that milk. So therefore, right, you're kind of like cheating, right? You're pulling the wool over your eyes. So if that's the case, right, you shouldn't do that. That's already not proper, improper, method here. So what again, right? What are we saying? You should only use the amount of milk that can go into the food, and feasibly, But otherwise, if not, if there's way too much milk, and it's not going to get absorbed into that food, so then it's not allowed. Okay, that's the Shulchan Aruch. Now let's go to the Ramah. It says the Ramah here, Aga, ואינו יהודי החולה בהמה ביום טוב ישראל רואה, יש להקל. So it says, right, that the truth is, right, that according to halacha, if the goy is milking, right, the animal, and the Jew is watching him, so that, there would be room to be lenient about that, right? But ach nagu bo leisur, it says in Ramah, the custom is to be stringent about that. The leshanot. So it says, therefore, don't change that, right? In other words, hold the custom, hold it down. Okay. Umiu b'yom tov shel galuyot mutar b'yom tov sheni, right? But it says on the second day of Yom Tov it's allowed because it's only rabbinical, right? So we're more lenient regarding that. Okay, that's the right, the Ramah. But according to according to the Shulchan Aruch, though, I think he would be lenient altogether, even on the first day of Yom Tov, because according to halakha, it's allowed. It's just that the custom was by them, the Ashkenazim, to be stringent. Okay, and then he has one more piece over here, right? Right. So then he says, look in the chapter, right? The 400 and 500 and 510. What is it talking about there? Talking about if you're allowed to make cheese on Yom Tov, right? So, as I said, if I remember correctly, it's forbidden to make cheese on Yom Tov. By the way, what is the prohibition of making cheese? Which labor is that? It definitely isn't cooking, right? You're not cooking there.
Nolad, no? Creating something new?
Nolad is rabbinical.
But isn't
right?
that the provision for making cheese on Yom? Well, I guess I
there's,
don't know.
There's something more stringent. There's something even more severe than Nolad. You know what it is? Anybody know? Okay, I'll tell you. I'll reveal the secret to you. So the prohibition is boneh, right? You know what boneh means? Building, right? You're building. You're building the cheese. That's the prohibition of cheese on Shabbat and Yom Tov. That's the reason why you can't do it. Okay, so that's the story there. Maybe we should just check that to be sure, because maybe my recollection is off. I'll tell you why. Because it could be that I'm talking about Shabbat, that it's forbidden to make cheese. But so let's just check that for a second. Why not? 510. Make sure we got it right. I don't tell you the wrong halacha. Okay. The truth is, we don't make cheese today, right? Anyway, we buy in the store, whatever. But we have those kind of people who like to do things the old-fashioned way, all the power to them. So I'm just checking this for a second. Right, so it says we don't do, yeah. Okay, I guess my memory was good. I got lucky this time, right? Okay. All right, so yeah, so it's not allowed to make on Yom Tov cheese. Okay, good. So let's go back to our discussion. And so now we're going back to what we just did tonight. This was the last chapter, as we said, right?
Kabbalah, I have a question.
Sure.
In regards to forbidden to make cheese on Yom Tov, no? What if they
Yeah.
do it in an abnormal way, like the fire, no? Or we were,
Yeah, do a shinui, right? Yeah, do a
uh-huh.
shinui. Yeah,
Well,
so the truth is that I don't think they allow in any manner.
okay,
Um, yeah,
okay, thank you.
good question. Good question. Good question. But the thing is, that the shinui won't really help you here. So why is that? Because as we said, right, we're not talking here about the labor of of cooking, right? We're talking about building. So building, is the kind of labor it's from the Torah. And we're not really lenient in building on Yom Tov. So this is the reason why we don't allow it. But I'll take a look at that. I'll investigate further. Bezat Hashem. If I find anything, I'll let you know. All right, good question. All right. So let me bring up the Shulchan Aruch here for today's lesson, right? Okay. So yeah. So as we said, right, earlier, and modidin kemach b'yom tov kedei lalush, right? So we're not supposed to measure flour on Yom Tov, right? To knead the dough. Ela ikach me'omed hadat, right? So what do? Do estimation, right? Yeah. Says the Rama here, umutar likach hakemach min hakli af al pi she'oseh guma bekemach. Ah, okay. So the Rama says something interesting, right? That you're allowed to remove the flour from the utensil. In other words, to pour it out, right? Even though you're making a hole inside there in the flour, right? So you may think, right, that there's like you're doing the prohibition of right of digging, right? So comes to tell you, right, that there's no prohibition to that. There are some people who have a wild imagination. They're gonna say, "Oh, that's you're digging there." It's excavation. So it comes to tell you the Rama, no, there's no prohibition of excavation, right? When it comes to that. Okay. Yeah. Very interesting. There's a Mishnah Berurah here, so I'm just going to take a look at it, see what he says about this. Maybe he has some kind of insight here. Nice insight. Okay, so yeah. צריך להראות מן הכלי, אלא יכול לתחום שזה בונים שם לא כבל. Okay, so Mishnah Berurah says good, right? Explains it good. So he says, why aren't we worried about excavation here, right? Digging, right? Whatever, right? Which is not allowed on Shabbat and Yom Tov. It's one of the forbidden labors. So says the Mishnah Berurah, it only applies to earth and not to food, right? Which is the proper explanation. I've seen this before, by the way, in other things, in other applications. So that's the reason why, There's no excavation going on here, right? Because excavation doesn't apply to flour. because flour is a food. Right? Okay, hope you understand me. Okay, let's see what we got coming up here. So yeah, I guess we'll do this one next time. Bezat Hashem. Well, I'll stop here. It's almost 9:30. Even though I came a little bit late, I apologize. But Bezat Hashem, I'll see you next week, Bezat Hashem, which is going to be Lag BaOmer, right? A little bit after Lag BaOmer, right? By the time, yeah, well, it'll still be Lag BaOmer if I come on time. So, right, we'll see you, Bezat Hashem, on Lag BaOmer. Have a nice Shabbat Shalom. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov. Thanks for coming. And thanks for your patience. I'm sorry, I apologize. As I told you guys, my daughter is here, from Israel, so a little bit it throws me off a little bit. So sometimes the timing doesn't come out so good. Okay, so Bezat Hashem, we'll see you. We'll see you next time. Bezat Hashem.
Shabbat shalom.
God bless. God bless.